Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to introduce you all to Satanic Ritual Abuse, MK Ultra Mind Control, Covert Experimentation, an Organized Abuse Survivor, Whistleblower, and Overcomer, Artist and Painter, Writer, Songwriter, Spiritual Conduit and Healer, and a woman who transforms the unspeakable into a testament of the soul's unyielding sovereignty. Magnolia Dove. Born into a lineage marked by survival and struggle, Magnolia's story began with roots in her mother's Holocaust survivor heritage and a rare AB positive bloodline, which made her a target immediately from birth. While the specifics of generational abuse remain partly shrouded, the echoes of trauma reverberated through her family. Her childhood, spent in the loving yet dysfunctional embrace of her parents, an only child navigating her father's cocaine addiction, was marred by early dissociation, a survival mechanism that veiled her earliest memories. At age 5, the darkness descended fully. Magnolia became a target of ritual abuse and mind control, ensnared by perpetrators tied to MK ULTRA and STARGATE projects, the Sisters of Darkness Coven, and even her best friend's parents, who were linked to the Warner Brothers and Hollywood circles. Her formative years were a battleground. At private school and later in public schools, Magnolia was subjected to routine programming, even as she excelled in her school's GATE programs. The abuse was harrowing. Satanic rituals where she was hung upside down, adrenalized blood being extracted, a shallow coffin burial with snakes and bugs, electroshock wands, starvation in padded rooms, bamboo shoots under her fingernails, and more as part of her brutal trauma-based mind control programming. At Warner Brothers linked gatherings, she even endured child adult fetish parties, a grim echo of the movie Eyed Wide Shut. These horrors, layered with drug-induced programming and near-death experiences, sought to fracture her spirit. The abuse began to wane around age 9 when key perpetrators, including her primary babysitter and sexual abuser, moved away. MK Ultra's grip loosened, though sporadic access for programming persisted. Magnolia buried these memories deep, blocking them out into adulthood, a survival strategy that allowed her to move forward until the past demanded reckoning. Just over a decade ago, a chilling memory of a perpetrator's Russian roulette threat unlocked a flood of memories linked to satanic ritual abuse. Over the next few years, the pieces coalesced, revealing the truth of her life that had been mentally compartmentalized. Magnolia's healing journey has been as fierce as her survival. Initially, her treatments offered little emotional support, and trauma rehab provided only surface level understanding of her complex trauma and PTSD. Her true healing came through unconventional and holistic paths and a profound connection to Jesus Christ through deliverance. Today, Magnolia stands as a whole, vibrant soul with many memories integrated, yet ever curious about the gaps in her story. Her decision to speak out is driven by a desire to provide hope, to fill in other survivors' fragmented memories, and to reclaim her testimony. As a songwriter, painter, writer, and healer, she is a master at turning the painful into the beautiful, into creations that resonate with ancient wisdom and urgent relevance. Her work is a lifeline for those navigating the liminal space between trauma and transcendence. As a radiant vessel of Yeshua's divine light, Magnolia channels transformative healing messages and profound spiritual wisdom, guiding those yearning for restoration and truth through their deepest wounds. With unwavering devotion, she creates a sacred sanctuary for survivors of ritual abuse, SRA, and mind control, offering services like deliverance, boundless compassion, and a path to wholeness and reintegration. Magnolia's voice is soft yet unshakable, her art a bridge between worlds, her healing practice a restoration of what was stolen. She is more than just a survivor. She is a warrioress and a thriver, proving that even the darkest experiences be transformed into light. Through her testimony, Magnolia invites others to reclaim their sovereignty, offering a message of hope. Quote, "The shadows may wound, but the spirit endures, and in its resilience, it creates beauty that cannot be erased." End quote. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you were interested in submitting a written testimony for my upcoming book series or to be featured on a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. Additionally, I've teamed up with a couple of my favorite brands to offer you guys exclusive discount codes on products I love, such as Rife Technology frequency machines and CZTL's premium methylene blue. You can find all the relevant links and codes along with other resources down below in the show notes. Your support across all platforms is greatly appreciated, especially as I've had to shift to alternative streaming platforms such as Rumble and X recently, following the extreme censorship that caused my last YouTube channel to be terminated. I've just recently started a new YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to me there at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I am now streaming new episode premieres from weekly. This transition to multiple platforms is crucial to continue sharing vital information with the public and disclosure communities. So thank you all wholeheartedly on the other side of the screen for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and to every guest on the show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, walking miracle, survivor, overcomer, and thriver, educator, creative, anti-child abuse and survivor advocate, spiritual warrior and woman of God, my new friend and the brightest light in a world of darkness, the one, the only, Magnolia Dove. Magnolia, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's such an honor to have you on.
Wow, thank you so much. That was such an amazing introduction. It made me emotional.
You're so worthy of it. You deserve
Thank
10
you.
pages of an intro. I'm
Oh,
lucky that
thank
mine
you.
didn't go on for half the show. I could have said so much more about you. You
Thank
were just
you.
incredible. I was blown away by the harrowing details that you shared with your story. And then once we finally got to connect and I heard your voice, I was just awestruck with how positive, with how upbeat. And I know it's not like that every single day, but just seeing the woman that you are today and what you've overcome, and then understanding where you came from is just, it's a miracle in itself. And I'm really thrilled that you've decided to come on here and share with others. I think you have a really big piece of the puzzle on so many different levels for people. You have a really comprehensive story that goes on a lot of different scenarios, industries, socio and
Mm.
economic classes. I mean, there's just a lot of different layers I think that people will be able to connect with and get puzzle pieces from, and
Yeah.
I think you're a wonderful representative for this community, and I'm just really honored and proud of you for coming on and sharing your testimony for the first time like this.
Wow, thank you so much for having me. And that amazing introduction. And, we forget things about ourselves sometimes. Like it's a nice reminder, when we are with ourselves our entire lives, we we forget that we did really overcome all of that. It's easy to kind of go into like, well, what am I not doing, or what could I be doing better, and the criticism, or so thank you. It's I also feel that it has, watching other survivors come forward, listening to other testimonies, I've been, just knowing, wow, my story kind of bridges to that, and because I experienced, you know, sort of different pockets of it, yes, I do feel that this could fill in gaps for people. It definitely brings more. clarity and understanding, which is important for just all of us, like a reckoning of coming to terms with that this is really happening on this planet. Um, Sometimes I think it's just so unbelievable for people to recognize.
I couldn't agree more. And people aren't wrong. It is. These are the most heinous crimes. It literally is too unbelievable and crazy sometimes to even wrap your mind around, even when you do believe it. Just hearing some of these things that somebody like you has overcome and at such a young age, and these impossible scenarios and decisions and choices that you had to make as just a small child, and it really is, it's a huge shock to the world, but ultimately, this really is the reality that we're living in, and a lot of this stuff could be very preventable. It could be exposed, and it could have some sort of justice in the form of stopping it and helping survivors on the other end of it who are ignored and erased and silenced,
Mhm.
and sharing these testimonies, I think, is a way to do that. It's a way to create validation, to create corroboration. And on the other side of that, to help other survivors who are just going through it, know that they're not alone, and
Mhm.
that other people have gone through things like they have and that they aren't crazy. Because of course you're going to think that you are. This stuff literally does. It sounds crazy to hear. I can't imagine remembering it and
Oh yeah.
like, oh my God, that happened.
Hmm.
Like, so of course,
Oh yeah.
of course people have a hard time believing it, but it's still happening, and we really have to help society understand that so they feel empowered and ready to stop it, and help expose it. And so it's really important what you're doing. Um,
Hmm.
I'm excited to talk about the work that you do. You actually work with survivors, which is
Hmm.
amazing.
I do.
Um, and you have an incredible story from, the absolute most darkest, heinous things in the world to finding the divine light, and everything in between. So I'm excited to sort of go on this journey with you. So
Mhm.
I thought maybe if it's okay with you, we'd sort of paint the scene a little bit. So you're an only child, and so
Mhm.
maybe if I know that your family history is still a little bit spotty, and we obviously want to keep privacy respected,
Yes.
for your safety and and for protection. But do you want to share a little bit about your family background, anything that you do know that might be important to your story, and then we can start talking about your childhood after that.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Eastern Long Island in the Hamptons, in East Hampton. My family, my parents are from the Bronx. My mother's side is, so from my grandmother's side of my mother, she's a Holocaust survivor. So she came over from Hungary with her sister, and actually, nine of her brothers and sisters were killed allegedly in different concentration camps. And so my mother's mother came here really not knowing anyone, having a few connections with family, her sister as one, and some cousins, and went to work in a bar, in like a beauty parlor, and it was raising my mother barely speaking English, and you know, a very kind woman who was the landlord of my grandmother kind of took my mother in a lot of ways. And I think that had a lot to do with my mother turning out good on many levels, even though this has happened to me, and I still have some questions to whether she was an MK Ultra survivor directly. Because of that, I'm not sure. My father's side are uh, mostly Romanian and Russian. So we're originally on the Hungarian side. The origin is actually Transylvania on the border. So it's that, like, how I've kind of like come to terms with it is it's that Roma psychic bloodline. There's a lot of that kind of heightened awareness in that bloodline. And but as far as on my father's side, I really haven't been able to get much history. I know that he was in the army for a short period of time as a chef, and I think he was raised like pretty middle to upper middle class, and my mother was raised pretty poor, lower class, and is a self-made woman. But I was born in New York City in Mount Sinai Hospital and a C-section baby, and really spent my whole childhood mostly in East Hampton, born and raised. And we did spend a few months out of the year in the Turks and Caicos. They had a beach house there that they had when they first met. They were like sort of traveling hippies, and they decided to build a house there. And so we would go there for, yeah, a few months out of the year. I would do a little bit of schooling there. My schooling, though, was extremely spotty with the amount of schools I went to before the age of 8.
And so your
That's
parents, from what you know, um, they and one thing too that you had mentioned, which I thought was significant, was your dad had addiction problems, which a lot of times can be a symptom of trauma, and
Mhm.
adults trying to contend with that. So
Yeah.
even though you don't know for sure, it does sort of seem like even if your parents didn't go through what you did, maybe they had been victimized in some way throughout their
Hmm.
life, just with how the people that they were around and sort of um some of the symptoms maybe that they were showing a little bit that maybe you could notice now as an adult looking back that you didn't necessarily see as a child.
Yes. Yeah, there was I remember them having like a lot of hippie artist kind of parties. And I do remember my father holding me when I was little, and feeling that he was out of it, that he was in pain, and because I'm such an empath, I could feel that off of him. And my mother admits that up until I think I was maybe up until she says up until I was 4, but it could have gone on longer, but that he struggled and that at one point she was going to leave him if he didn't stop. And then he absolutely did stop. And I also want to point out that one of my main sexual perpetrators is linked directly to my father with drugs. Whether he targeted my father because of the group, the babysitter, it was a group of babysitters, 3 women, that did daytime traffic us, and it's possible that that is his link to my father. Or but it was a small community is my point, and they definitely were involved in drug use slash um distribution, like drug dealing together. And I do have memories of being left with this man
I'm
alone.
so sorry. That's horrifying.
Hmm.
And
It
so
is.
looking back at your childhood, you do, and people understand what we're talking about with layers and like different sort of compartments of society in a sense that your story intertwines with and industries. When did maybe the first abuse or dysfunction start in your life as a child? And maybe we can sort of unfold it in order as these different people and these different industries and different layers sort of start piling on each other.
Hmm. Okay. So, I mean, it is hard to know the first abuse because it depends on what abuse we're talking about. Like the first time I was taken to a safe house, I feel was very early I feel like I was not pre-verbal, but just verbal enough, 4 or 5, as early as 4 or 5, where I was taken. All of the abuse really feels the way my memories had come up was because they came up and, I had repressed them. The first memories that came up, and sometimes I think the mind will show you the first almost screen memories that aren't maybe as bad or severe as others. So it's as your psyche can handle them. So I did start to remember in 2010 that there was a man, and I'm almost like, should I just say his name? His name was Bobby, and he would sexually abuse me. He would sexually abuse his own family members, his stepdaughter, and biological son and stepson. And I was left alone with him. I was accessed by him at the babysitters who had trafficked us during the day and were planning to sell my virginity because I witnessed that conversation. I witnessed a lot of things in that trafficking circle. It was a satanic cult, the Sisters of Darkness, and they were involved in trafficking for money-making purposes, obviously. And I remember being downstairs very late with this babysitter, and my mother was late to pick me up, and so she had me come down with her to fold laundry, and there was another woman over who was connected to her, also a neighborhood babysitter that would have these groups of kids over to her house, and she was talking about the business of trafficking children and like talking her into it. And I just remember them speaking about, like, she was convincing this other babysitter to do this, that her husband wouldn't have to work 3 jobs, that she has all of this access to children. And, it's hard to put a total timeline on it, but I believe within a few weeks of that is when a lot of this operation really started going. And sometimes it was someone, paying to watch a child get humiliated, like watch a child eat something off of the floor, um, acting out sexually, just spending time alone with a child, sometimes putting on plays and entertaining adults. And then what became apparent was the spiritual component, the satanic element to this. And I have, they used to kind of argue who got to be, uh, I guess, what is it, Glinda the Good Witch of the Wizard of Oz, right? Is it? And I mean, they were full on witches, and they were talking about the name of their coven, which they ended up calling it Sisters of Darkness. And I remember the conversation about they liked the band Sisters of Mercy. So, like, how about Sisters of Darkness? But it was very clear that there were people above them that were teaching these principles, that they got to have their own, like, backyard coven, but that they were not the higher upper echelons of this. And but they did a lot of torturous things. And I have one memory where I was in their yard playing, and the this woman Alice, one of the women, came over to me and said, "We're going to play a game." And she put these like gravity boots on me of some kind. I mean, I didn't even know what they were. And she picked me up by my feet and hung me off of something. How I see it as, it was like a laundry tee that probably had like hooks. And I was hung upside down. And she said, "Jesus went through this and walked away," and waited for me to get into a very panicked state, and then came back. And I mean, I was trying to get my head, what, all the blood rushing to your head like that, it's really uncomfortable. And so I was trying to like bend my body up so I could get my head above my heart. And she came back and said, "Are you scared? Are you panicked?" And I was like, "Yes, yes, please," begging for them to get me down. And she just took a syringe off the back of my spine and extracted blood, which I have come to understand that that's adrenalized blood. And I would watch these witches get high on it and talk about how amazing they felt. And they would say things like, "Wait till you've been, I feel like I'm 18 again." And then like one of the others who was more experienced in it would say, "Wait till you've been on this for a month." And I remember them keeping what I think were likely child parts, from how I remember it. And of course, when we come up with these memories, when these surface, like we're like, am I crazy? But I remember a conversation of, how do we know that the blood isn't infected with AIDS? It was the 80s. Um, and they were like, "Oh, Doctor so and so," like I guess it was their network work doctor, tests all the blood. And I think they were eating like some kind of bone marrow. They also were, while abusing children and myself, they were also training me and a select few of the kids, especially the ones they had the most access to. So, yeah, I was like in training to be one of them and I was eventually then hazed into their coven. And that would be the day that they did the mock coffin burial, which feels like one of my most extremely traumatic days. And so that was a long weekend where this main babysitter, was it was my parents were working and they were away. They used to do put on these like flea markets and antique shows. And it was, I believe, a long weekend that they were leaving for work. And this babysitter came to stay at my house, which in my head I thought, "Oh, well, she'll be more well behaved because it's my house." And obviously that was not the case. And she invited the coven over, and there were some children there that I didn't know, that were not a part of the normal play group. And I've come to understand the term like expendable children. And yeah. And so there was this one boy, Elijah, and he was around my age and I was around age 6. And they had us play together. They were just encouraging us to play. And then they would throw out little terms like, you guys are soulmates now. You guys are bonded. This is like your brother. And then they would flip the script. They flipped the script on me and they said, now you can either watch us torture him to death, or you can kill him and put him out of his misery. And I didn't like either of those choices. And they said, and if you don't comply with us, if you don't listen to what we tell you to do, we're going to kill your parents. And just a side note, I just want to say that during all these different abuse scenarios that happened, these people would use whatever worked in that moment. It was either, sometimes it would be your family knows we're your real family, like, and because you're being abused, you're dissociating each and every um, scenario. So I did not like that option, but they actually started to physically abuse him in front of me. The men were doing this. There were men connected, one being one of my main perpetrators. And they started to twist his, like, dislocate his arm. And at a certain point, he just screamed and said, just get it over with, to me. And what I remember was that we went down into the kitchen and got like a grapefruit. And they placed an X on a grapefruit and they had me practice with a knife, like a stabbing. And I would say this is the most traumatic thing that happened because it's the thing that shattered my soul the most. And this was when they had him lay down, they had a knife and they wrapped my hands around the knife. And I actually couldn't do it. I was like, I can't even penetrate this. And they were even talking, you have to penetrate it's horrible to think, but you have to penetrate the like breastbone. I didn't even have that strength. So how I'm remembering it is that two of the witches wrapped their hand around my hand and plunged the knife into this boy. And there was blood, and I screamed and was so, like, so fractured, so dissociated, screaming my head off, and them saying, now you could be implicated. Now you could go to jail for this if you tell anyone. And I remember just screaming and crying and saying, you made me do it. You made me do this. And yeah, that was really soul shattering. And it was a part of an entire day of being hazed into the cult where they then did a ritual with, they gave me how I'm remembering it is like a tab. I believe it was a tab of LSD because I started to like trip out. And we picked an area in my yard that was already dug. It was like a mound that had, it was sort of like a fresher construction site. And they had brought in a child-sized coffin. And because I was tripping, it's hard to know whether these were real trained snakes or not real. But they convinced me that I was in a coffin with snakes and insects and not to move or the snakes would bite. And they gave me some kind of a mask that to me I affiliated with like a snorkel because, you know, well, I affiliate it now with a snorkel. I used to go snorkeling in the Caribbean with my father. And there was some kind of breathing device where I was able to breathe, but I was enclosed in something and it was in the dirt. That was apparent to me that there was a burying happening once they closed this. And I was absolutely terrified. I was afraid that if I moved even like an inch, that something was going to bite me. I was most afraid on an emotional level of that I would never make it out and that my parents would think that I ran away or was like kidnapped. So that was the biggest fear I would say was that they'll just never know what happened to me and the heartbreak of that. And I would say that's when a lot of the LSD was kicking in and I was really able to connect on a deeper level spiritually. And I heard a very low but firm feminine voice, which I'm recognizing as what people call Gaia, like Mother Earth and or Mother Nature, Earth. And she said, even if you never make it out again, I'll take you. I'll take care of you. And that's when I was able to just kind of like be in the moment. I started to shift my body a little and realize nothing was biting me. And my consciousness elevated in that moment. So when the cult members pulled me out, and I mean, there was like, I remember dirt in my mouth. Like, I remember they were brushing me off. I had an actual vision of, I guess I had seen Star Wars at that age. And so I think it's R2D2 when he comes out of, when he's in the desert. I got like a visual, the mind will always give you these like visual pictures. Um, and they had water for me and they said, you passed, you made it, you're in, you're in the group. And I just remember thinking, I don't want to be in this group. um, but at the same time, I knew that these people were, this was like small potatoes. Like I had just elevated my consciousness in that experience above what was happening, truly. And I remember then I said, what about Elijah? And they said it was all a show. It was all smoke and mirrors. Um, the blood wasn't real. It was pig's blood, which they use in movies. They said all of these things, which could have also been a trick. You know, I think this is how these people operate as well, to just confuse you, so that you don't know what is real and what isn't. But after that is when they married me to 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 the devil, to Satan, Lucifer, and they had us drink from these metal goblets, and they had us do like a it was like a mini aisle marriage. But to confuse my memories, they had another child that had been there walk down the aisle with me. They had me walk down with my favorite stuffed animal, and then they did the real, like, satanic ritual marriage. And why they do that is so that when your memories come up, when you actually, start to really like unravel this stuff, it's so confusing because they took a memory and layered it 3 times. And yeah, and that's a lot of work, just going into therapy and starting to unravel these things and figuring out what's real, what was imaginary, what was a threat that was projected onto you that you envisioned in fear, that's not actually a memory of what happened. Those are things that, I had to do a lot of work in many years of therapy to decipher. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing that
Hmm.
absolutely terrifying and horrific memory, three memories with us. I know that this stuff isn't easy to talk about. I know that this is
Yeah.
kind of your first time sharing it on a platform like this.
Hmm.
That was really very brave of you and very courageous. Unfortunately, that's such a pain point with this healing is survivors who grew up in unsafe environments like you, reckoning with the fact that adults that should have been keeping them safe and that they thought were keeping them safe in their front personalities, growing up,
Yeah.
actually behind the scenes, perpetrating them and then also forcing these children from such a young age to perpetrate. And that is such a pain point for survivors to heal from their guilt
Yeah.
of harming a human, an animal, a child.
Mm.
But unfortunately, that is a massive part of the programming, and it serves multiple levels in itself, from keeping you loyal because they threaten you and say, things like how you said, if you don't do this, we're going to harm this person.
Mhm.
We're going to harm your family, or we're going to harm the person that we're asking you to hurt worse than if you just do it. And then on the other end, you know, they give you these different memories of actually having the experience, and then they gaslight you with it. No, it wasn't real.
Mhm.
There's all these different levels of programming that create such a plethora of emotions of anger, of confusion, of sadness, of just deep, conflict. And it can create a lot of loyal parts too, which obviously dissociation, which I'm grateful that you talked about because that's obviously the means to an end of all of this is dissociation and creating identities that can, hold these secrets in different compartments. And,
Yes.
when they do these horrific things, they're confident that you're not going to remember and that if you do, it's going to be so confusing. And I mean, just trying to comprehend, being 6 years old and being handed that decision, adults who were put in the same position, if they were randomly, let's just say kidnapped or taken somewhere and somebody said, here's your choice, you can hurt this person in this way, or we're going to hurt them this way, and it's going to be even worse. You might as well just do it. I don't know a single adult that wouldn't just break and shatter. And so to think about these impossible choices that they put on little children to make and then make them feel guilty. They threaten them, like you said, you're on drugs, so you're already, sort of seeing the world in a very different way, which can be terrifying too. being on a drug like LSD, where it really distorts your reality to begin with, and
Yes.
it's amazing, the work that you and others have done to make sense of all of this, because I'm sure even sharing it with a therapist can be very vulnerable for many reasons, especially not knowing if either A, they'll be traumatized and say, I can't work with this, or if they won't believe you, and it takes such courage to actually talk about this. And I'm grateful that you did, because there's other survivors on the other side of the screen. There's people, even if they didn't have something that extreme happen to them, we all carry guilt in some way. And we look at it from one perspective that, like, I should have done something, it's my fault, and there's a lot more to things that happen because of other people that make us carry guilt. And when we can take that guilt and make sense of it, take the shame off our own shoulders and sort of put it where it belongs, realize what we did and were forced to do, but then also realize, like you said, you had adults that had their hands over yours. They had you practice. Like, there
Mm-hmm.
was a lot that went into eventually forcing you to do this, and being able to take that shame and say, okay, this was real. I did experience this. It is horrible. And I'm going to heal from this. I'm going to go through it and I'm going to make sense of it and face it and heal it. But I'm not going to carry the shame. I'm going to put it where it belongs, on them. And I'm going to realize that I was a child. I didn't have a choice. And it was an impossible choice. If you would have said no, or if you would have somehow, like, completely defied it, they still would have made you do it. They would have restrained you and made you do it, or they would have, made you watch a worse scenario that they did to scare you,
Yes.
same. So it's literally like a catch 22, like, no matter what you do, and so, and they're right, a lot of times the situation is worse if the child doesn't comply, and they do that for a reason too. They want you to be like, all right, I'm just going to do this because I know what you're going to do is going to be worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so that also creates a compliance in the child where it just breaks them down, and they're like, there's no point in saying no because it's going to happen anyways. And there's just so many different, like, layers of programming that they put into this. And so I deeply appreciate you sharing, because, like I said, it's a really, really big struggle point in this community. It can be really hard to make sense of, but the more that we talk about these things, then we realize that we can take that shame gently off and put it where it belongs, and then do the healing for the reckoning of what actually happened, of being
Yeah.
forced into an impossible situation, and realizing that it wasn't your fault, but that it
Yes.
still was horrible, it still happened, and that there's still
Horrible.
deep healing that needs done. So thank you from the bottom
Yeah.
of my heart for talking about these really hard things.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yes, and I want to say that, I mean, obviously, why they use children is because children are pure and innocent and the closest to God. And these people who are beings of hatred and darkness, like the lowest of the low consciousness, they they get off on corrupting someone that is closest to God. And I have thought a lot about what was their purpose? What were they really getting from this? Other than, I mean, I watched adults take vows that they were going to get certain things from the devil. They were promised things by the leader of the coven, different things. One woman who couldn't get pregnant wanted to be, wanted to have another baby, and just wealth, and you know but on this other level of, like, have you heard about redemption through sin? Have you heard about that? I find that to be really interesting when you look at it from a higher perspective of, you know, these beings that are clearly suffering so much that they would do these horrific acts. Um, they're a lot of them, I believe, are trying to redeem themselves through, it's called redemption through sin. They think that if they fuck up so bad, that somehow, like, God will have mercy on their soul. It really doesn't even make sense, but they're serving on a level of like duality. They're serving the darkest of the dark, and in a way they are they're catalysts, but it's it's like thinking that if you mess up so badly, like, to your parents, like, maybe they'll take pity on you and, like, take you back. It's these people are so rejected, or have rejected life so much, that they cannot source their own power from original source, light creator, holy mother, father, creator, the source of all that is. They have to take it from other people. That's what they think. I don't know if that fully makes sense, but it's just something that comes to me, like, sometimes when I think about, like, what is the purpose of that? And obviously a lot of it, there's nuances, but there's levels of power also. Some of them are just enjoying getting power over others. Some of them are, really deep into occultism, and they're gaining, power on the dark side. They're working the dark side, and they're gaining power that way, which is not real power. Because with all of this that has happened to me, I mean, I actually have always had an angelic council connection. I've seen so much of the sort of the realms of existence, and of humanity, and the angelic realms. And when, you know, to go on the dark side of everything, it only goes to a certain level. Like, the light is so much higher. Um, you, it's like, there's a ceiling of pretty low ceiling of consciousness, is what I'm saying. Even if you graduate to a seemingly very high level in these, like, occult practices that are sourced from darkness. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a really great analogy for that because it's again an impossible thing for people to contend with, which also makes people gaslight their own ability to believe in this stuff because it's so backwards from how somebody who's not a psychopath is, unless you're a psychopath, unless you're a Satan worshiper and somebody that is just, they live for that power, or so they're trained to live for that power and
Yeah.
conditioned and mind controlled to,
Yeah.
it can just seem so bizarre that there's people out there that are committing these crimes and then going to work the next day and they're just out there in society. And so I do get how people can just not be able to sit with it because it doesn't make sense. But at the same time, when we're looking at this, we do have to put on an impossible lens to look through of understanding psychopathy, of understanding narcissism, of understanding the complete and total domination of your mind given up to, you know, other people, and then also to being so hungry for power and to having that be something that you're trained to just continue wanting and to do it all at all costs, no matter what it is, that you will do whatever it takes to get that power, and then all the different layers under it, the blackmailing that they do and,
Mhm.
dissociating you. And I mean, there's just so many different layers to it. And I also appreciate too that you brought up why they use children, and you have some examples of this in your story where they know that children, especially children that they specifically breed or target that have different qualities that they're interested in, such as like how you said your bloodline has sort of heightened psychic abilities that run through it. And
Mhm.
that's a big fascination for them for many reasons. But when we're looking at, a ritualistic perspective, without their soul sort of being intact, without them having a connection, like you said, to the divine light, when they're shut off to that because they're vibrating on an opposite frequency, they can't connect to these beings that they want power from. And they have to use, like you said,
Mhm.
a child, something that is connected to it in order to have like that conduit. And so a lot of these children, they're grooming to further enhance their psychic abilities, which your story exemplifies, with some of the things that you were recognized for. But you really see, how these dynamics make sense to these people because of who they are, which is different and pretty much opposite of how, a person in normal society is. But that
Mhm.
does make total sense what you're saying, and maybe we could talk a little bit about that since we're sort of talking about the satanic side, a little bit about some of the ways that you were recognized and used for your own spiritual gifts that you have, which
Mhm.
is kind of another sad point in this because a lot of you are born with these really extraordinary spiritual gifts, and luckily a lot of you now that get out are using them the ways that God intended you to. But of course, these people, these psychopaths, they want to harness that for their own agendas and use you as a conduit to use those gifts to help them, achieve power or to do evil or, to help them with these very dark agendas. So maybe you could touch on that a little bit with your story, and help
Yeah.
bring some sense to it, but also sort of share because this is kind of a big part too, the spiritual side of it.
Yeah, it really is. Um, well, I mean, as far back as I can remember, I was sensitive to spirits. The first house we lived in was haunted. I remember watching spirits fly around me, and when I was in the crib, I was a seer always. And especially as a child, which I don't see the spirits now, but I can more feel them. And with my connection with Jesus, with Yeshua, and I can channel and if I want to speak to other spirits, I tend to stick with my original counsel, which is angelic counsel and Yeshua, for safety reasons, but I always had that ability to see the unseen world and to fly out of my body, which that would be up for debate whether I was taught to fly through the remote viewing programming that I received through Project Stargate. But yeah, I mean, I I was born on a date that has some heightened. It has some celebrity names around it, and even like one yogic master uh is was born on that date. But my father was friends with this man named Howard, and he worked with Ingo Swann, who was head of the remote viewing department for the CIA, remote viewing. Ingo Swann, and who also worked with Russell Targ and Harold Hal Pudoff is his name. And so those are people that I've met. When I look at photos of them, I very familiar that I've worked with them. I remember working with them and I remember being trained by them. And they would, the what's explained to you as a child, as an incentive to want to cooperate in certain ways, even though they're going to force you to cooperate anyway. But like on the higher levels of that, you're told as a child, like, you're helping our government, do things, get rid of the bad people. It's like you're helping be the hero. That's the programming with it. And so even when I wasn't, and possibly even before I went to a safe house, and that's hard to kind of chronologically like put on a timeline, but I remember Howard would, and these men that had a hand in my programming would talk to me about having a visual before going to sleep and then setting a target. And the visual would be something that would help me to fly out of my body, and then a landing spot to make sure that I could get back into my body. And so, as a child, you pick something like a hot air balloon or a kite or an airplane. And I would choose the landing of my friend's bottom of his staircase. He just had a very cool house. And so I picked the bottom of his stairs to land, and that's how I would give myself that focus of going back into my body after I would go out into, essentially out into the ethers, into the stars. And when they would pick a practice target, your spirit, essentially your consciousness is viewing something from above, um and dropping in. So you could be witnessing a conversation, you could be seeing um a building. It's the way something is physically set up, a note, a conversation being had. But a lot of it, obviously, with a child was practice before you're likely doing the really serious, uh, like heavy hitter work. But did that answer your question? Is that going in the, that's,
Absolutely, yes. And thank you for bringing up Stargate, because the remote viewing part is very common with the MK Ultra circles as well, and a gift that a lot of these children seem to naturally have, which to my understanding, something like remote viewing and all spiritual gifts, I think we all, no matter who you are, you can tap into them. But they recognize that some of these children have the ability to do it better or more naturally. And so
yeah,
then they continue to refine the child in it, just like how another child might go to, soccer practice every day. With you, instead of going to a soccer practice, they're training you on this and having you practice it and refine it for them to be able to use later on in your life whenever you're, of course they're using it then, but they, like you said, they're training you whenever you're young to use you in a more serious manner as you get better at it through time.
yes, yes, exactly. And there's, with that, obviously, especially when you're in their direct care in like a safe house where the training is going really strong, there is so much pressure and torture, being, which honestly, I mean, it's not necessary to do that. If you think about a child and how open a child is, and especially like a good-natured child, um like we listen. We didn't need to be, electroshocked to participate in the exercise. That's the part to me that is just baffling. But it's obviously a big part of that is to make the child forget and to dissociate into specific fragments of personalities. And, you know, the the first memory that I have of being taken to a safe house, I actually remember my family being threatened. And there were two men there, and I don't know if they had a gun or said they had a gun, but I remember my mother begging them not to take me, and them giving her the choice of either we will take out your whole family or you will allow us access to your child. We won't hurt a hair on her head and we'll bring her back. And I was literally I was picked up with my legs dangling over this man's arms. I remember what he was wearing, like part of it at least. It was like a yellow, like peak kind of collared shirt, like cotton shirt, and a members only jacket. That used to trigger me when I would see that. Um, and and I was brought into this, how I remember it, as like an open seated black Cadillac with tinted windows and leather seats, open seating. And I just was put in the car, and I remember like crawling around the back and looking at I'd never seen windows like that before. And one of the men saying, "See, you can see out, but no one can see in." And we went on a very long drive, which I've kind of tracked it. It may have been a safe house in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure of all my locations. Um, and I don't know how many times I was brought into a safe house, but I was brought into a facility where there were other children like me and around my age and put into these exercise training rooms. And I remember like one of the things that really stands out to me was a boy that they put me in front of, and there was a female, I guess I would call her like a psychologist, or she was a trainer, but it felt like she was like a therapist. Um, and she had like a gentle nature to her. And she had me hold palm to palm with this boy and said, "Now, no speaking. Let him show you his most impactful experience." And somehow, I guess he would tell something to her, and she would have note of what he was projecting to me. And I saw that this boy had had a single mother, that she would make him mac and cheese and chocolate milk, and I saw the carpeting in the house, and that he used to have long hair, and that in this program he was brought into, that his head had been shaved. And I remember and he was really sad that all his hair was gone and he missed his mother. And I remember like just saying, "You still look nice." And she was like, "Yes, you can tell him that he looks nice." And so there were moments where there was emotional encouragement and then utter emotional torture. Build a safe place in your mind and draw it out. And I would draw these like heaven landscapes with the Pegasus, and then that therapist would leave and a man would come in and say there is no safe place, and I would be like tortured. So it was a lot of things like that. There's one scenario where I was put into a mint green padded room, and I mean padded floor to ceiling, and I was starved. And I don't know for how long, but I was so hungry, and I was aware that I was being watched from like an observational deck of sorts. And there was also one of those doors where it's a split door where someone can open to talk to you. And some of the guards would sometimes like peek in and tease me and eat a pizza like in front of me, and I'd be begging to eat something. And at one point, it was explained to me by one of the facilitators, we can't feed you. You need to be a clear channel for the session. Um, and and they were watching me. I remember loud noises being played, and I was throwing myself up against this padded wall and just like collapsing in utter just despair, frustration. Like I I I remember again, I could be mixing memories with that one padded room incident, but for some reason my memories also show me a waterboarding experience where I was like where my head just kept being like pushed into water as like a form of torture. And at those points, um I feel like at high torture points, I really did connect with what I would call God, like holy Father energy. Like at one point I saw him going through it with me. Um so, and I had a lot of those angelic intervention moments. I had a near death during either that experience or at the safe house in that experience because they were doing so much electroshock and things that were bringing me to near death. Um, and so I did have one experience where, and I probably have more than this that I'm not even remembering, but the one that I really remember is um, waking up on like heaven's floor, essentially, and there were angelic beings standing over me, and I just said I don't want to go back there. Um, and some like mystical things there where like a pogo stick in heaven goes a lot higher than one on regular 3D Earth. I mean they let me play. Like I was like riding the horses and the Pegasus, and there's like that stuff is those are creatures of heaven. And I was then taken to, I believe there's different realms of heaven according to consciousness, but I was brought by these two angels to a gate where there was a being there, and I was afraid to even like speak, but it was saying let her speak. And I said I don't want to go back. And the answer I got was the choice is ultimately up to you. but you would be missed back there. There are many people who would miss you, and there's a calling for you to fulfill. Like you wouldn't finish that. Um, and I just remember making that, I've always been like one of those reluctant empaths, like, I guess I have to go back. Kind of like, you have to do the right thing. And I was told to by this being at these, like, I saw the pearly gates. I was told show her around and then bring her back, and the angels flew me into different realms. Like, what do you call them? I don't, I'm for some reason at a loss for the word, but almost different etheric dimensions, kind of. And then I was shown what I would call the realm of hell. And I was flown through it, and I actually got scared. And they said, don't worry, like, you're not condemned here. Like, they were showing me everything. And I saw this, it was like a circus, like the darkest circus you could ever see. I saw all of these beings on so many levels just suffering, and but there was like fire throwing, and I mean it was like a really bad what is that festival called that, like, it was bizarre.
Like a Burning Man type
Yes, thank
festival.
you. Like a bad version of Burning Man. Like it was suffering souls, and it was like everyone going through their own level of torment. It was condemned souls. And it was also bizarre. Like I said, like for the lost, fire throwing, and like just like a bizarre, like a like weird, like a David Lynch movie kind of stuff. Um and yeah, I got scared, and then they flew me out of there, but it was like a tour of hell. And I believe this whole experience ended on a better note, though, one of the higher realms, and then I just like was zipped back into my body. And I remember having like a renewed hope. It was an instantaneous renewed hope, because obviously being tortured like that in a body that you can't get out of creates a very visceral sense of hopelessness. So, but for some reason, that whole experience gave me a new level of hope, and I remember saying, I can do this.
That's so profound. And it's so
It
interesting
is.
too to hear like how spiritual you were from such a young age that you
Mhm.
have these like really horrific things that are happening to you and your body's undergoing the most extreme stress, torture, and trauma that a human could possibly be in, right to the point, like you said, of pushing you to death or beyond.
Yeah.
And here you are able to tap, whether it was through the LSD, like how you were talking about, or just through your own consciousness, being
Yes.
able to like get yourself through what you were going through leaving that moment and being able to climb sort of above where your consciousness was in that
Yeah.
moment. It's really interesting hearing stories from you and others like that. I feel like it's one thing to, have one of those experiences where, somebody say drowns. You hear of these stories sometimes where there's people that they do die for a moment and then they come back, or cardiac arrest.
Mhm.
People that have written about, what's on the other side. But I also think that there's, profound experiences that aren't talked about enough, like on the brink of that, before that actually happens, if it
Yeah.
even does happen, those moments going towards death or beyond. Right before that, there's these really profound moments that people have with being able to, sort of connect with something greater than them in order to hold on. And then how your body on in this physical plane that you and I are speaking in right now is being tortured to death. And here you
Mhm.
are, up in these heavenly realms,
Yes.
making a decision to go back into your body. That like
Yes.
brought me to tears hearing you say that, a child again making these impossible decisions when you could have just been like, no, you know what, I didn't, this is not the empathy that I signed up for, like I'm done.
Hmm.
Instead, you have like no safety around you in the moment that you have to go back in, and you're still saying people will miss me, I have an impact to make, I'm going to go back and do it despite what I'm going back into, just very, very profound.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, because we don't, so I just want to say, like, once the once the body and the ego are involved in this, like, because we are infinite beings, our souls, like, we're good, we're covered. Like, I truly believe that. Like, if you lead a good life, you have a good spirit, um, you know, we are divinely protected. But when you are being subjected to such levels of darkness and torture, like, it's very hard for the ego identity and body to deal with that. It's like, and I've had to do, because, and I don't necessarily promote doing a lot of shadow work, but in my healing, I've had to acknowledge that my ego was really prepped to be thick at a certain point because of what I went through, that I just on that level felt like I needed these other ways to protect myself. So my ego almost, like, it's like when you have too much coverage or protection, it starts to hurt. Like, that's what happened to me, where I've had to really strip those layers to, like, bring me back into becoming an open vessel, being an open heart, connecting again to others, like, because that stuff really closes you down. It's very challenging to this physical experience.
Yes. 100%. I couldn't agree more. And one thing, before I forget, that I wanted to ask you about some of the memories that you were just talking about.
Mhm.
When you say safe house, is that like a
Mhm.
literal safe house, or is this sort of a private, for better lack of words, like programming center that is just utilized for children like you?
So I call it a safe house just because that was a term that someone said to me when I was processing a lot of these memories, like,
Hmm.
that they're called safe houses, but and to me the safety is just for them to protect themselves, like the perpetrators. Yeah, I mean, it's government and I mean, I don't know, like, is it government and private? Like, it's for sure only high level access to these buildings. Yeah, they're a facility. I mean, it was my word I was using for, like, a CIA facility. And like I was saying, I was telling you before this about, you know, likely a lot of your listeners know that the CIA, a lot of those files are out through the Freedom of Information Act, these MK Ultra files. And I found one of mine, at least in a grouping where, it talks about in 1984, 25 psychic children were used in Project Stargate, psychic testing, um, on these children. And I'm like, yep, that was me. I'm one of them. I wish I could find some of the others. I wish I could really talk to. some of the people I was down there with, those memories are spotty as far as who I was around. It's, you know, I would say most of what I remember are the direct programming torture sessions that were done. And I think we were kept quite isolated for a lot of the time.
And now, also to go along with that, Stargate is obviously sort of an extension of gifted and talented programs, sort of in the same realm, kind of a government scouting program. One is a little
Hmm.
bit more severe than the other a lot of times. There's
Hmm.
different layers of gifted and talented as well, but you were actually put in those programs as well in school. What
Hmm.
do you remember about that? And were you taken off property, or what was the gifted and talented program like for you?
So, not, I don't, not a lot, like, as far as, like, so yes, I was in gifted and talented up until a certain point, and then I feel I was taken out of it. I actually, at a certain point from all of this abuse, like, I developed learning issues, disabilities, because I was dissociating so badly. I would be reading in a group and my brain would dissociate. I could sometimes not even read the words. Um, and but yes, so I changed schools 3 times before the age of 8. And that's not counting the little bit of schooling I did in the Caribbean. That would be the school number 4 that I'm just like, that was more just woven in. And that was a very small group of kids, and it was right on the beach. And that was only like when my parents wanted their vacation for a month or two at a time.
Mm.
And, but first I was in a public school. So Kinder Care, I think, was one of the programs that was connected. I don't know if you've looked into Kinder Care, and there's a lot of like known MK Ultra connected to that. That would have been like nursery school, kindergarten. That was public, and then and like a preschool. Then I was in a public school where a lot of testing went on, and I was in that like G&T kind of thing. And I just remember really uncomfortable, strange testing going on and a lot of hearing tests. Up until I was 9, they would pull me out for those weird hearing tests with the beeping that are like so, who knows what that fully was, because I don't think it was just about testing your hearing. Um, but to me, that's the least traumatizing of most of the things that happened. But it's reinforcing, just in general, public schools, and I won't go too much off on this tangent, but I believe all of us, even the non like mainstream MK Ultra survivors, like we were all traumatized by public schools, municipal buildings with asbestos, like cleansing products that are just chemical and artificial, like, and just really unsavory, teaching tactics, insensitivity. Um, but So yes, at one school, which was a school called Spring School, which was public, and that was my technically my kindergarten and my first grade, there was a lot of these weird tests. A lot of like testing my um like a lot of puzzles, a lot of like just oddly designed tests that I would be alone with one other facilitator doing these things to be placed. And then I spent 2 years in a private school that I believe once I was really like in the program, once that was underway, they were paying for this. And there was a lot of talk about just my direction. Like it wasn't just teachers and my mom, talking about, oh, she needs to learn more science. It was like two men that were had a hand in my education and the direction of it and would pull me out during this private school, which was actually at a school called Hampton Day School. And we would go into the gymnasium, which, when it was not being used, and they would do programming there. And that's when there were also some Mason, what I believe were Freemason programming things going on as well. Like, I just remember being told, like, do you want to be a brick in the house? Do you like prepare yourself to be built like a brick in the house? Like, I was hazed into multiple, like, I remember talk of my main perpetrator, him trying to convince my father that I would be, that I should be a part of a Rainbow Girls program, which is a Mason program. I think it's also connected to like the Brownies and Girl Scouts and stuff. It's all that like extracurricular, like, let us guide your child to be a better citizen, but it's programming. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question. And also, I don't have so many like GNT memories, but I know that that's a part of it. And I remember when I wasn't in it anymore, one of my best friends like bragging, that's why I'm in gifted and talented. Like, like,
Yeah,
hmm
it's interesting how these stories overlap so much and how many children who were in MK Ultra or related programs, Stargate, were also coinciding with having this additional testing done in their regular day schools that they were going
hmm
to on different
hmm
levels. There were some stories I've heard where the testing went into MK Ultra type experiments actually in the school program where other people
Yes.
had more experiences like you where those programs were maybe at a different facility where they would do the Stargate type remote viewing, and then school was, the typical gate stuff, the headphones and the weird scenarios that they'd have children figure out, and just like the bizarre um
Mm.
kind of strategy games and things like that they
Yes.
kids do. But it's a commonality in this community that, a lot of you for one have and were tested for high IQs and that you were put in those programs in one way or another, no matter what level it was, a lot of you, were recognized even in school for having
hmm
the high IQ and the propensity to, maybe have psychic abilities and these different things that they were testing for there too.
Yes. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
what other locations were you taken to for these experiments, for these, abuses? I know Montauk is near you. There's, New York is it's kind of a hotspot whenever there's not a ton of survivors out there talking about it, but it
hmm
has been coming up more and more, and you realize that there is actually a lot to the state. So I'd be curious what else you could tell us about where you were at.
Okay, so where I'm from is just about 25 minutes from Montauk. So I do believe that I was at the base. I am not sure how often, but I believe I was brought there. Um, I wish I had more locations to give, because a lot of my programming also feels as if it were in my bedroom, in
Mm,
my own bedroom, which there was one deprogrammer I worked with in my healing journey who said that if these people were invested enough in me, in programming me, they could have recreated my bedroom in a safe house or in a facility. So that, you know what I'm saying? As but also it is very possible because I of what the things my parents knew about, and like I said, when I say they knew, I mean parts of them were knew about this. Um, I could have been programmed in my bedroom a lot. And but as far as Montauk goes, I really only have one memory of likely being there, and that is there was so there are two men that have written a book, the Montauk Project Chronicles. And I believe that I've met Preston Nichols, who's now deceased. And they wrote all these things about what went on in Montauk, and were connected to this Project Philadelphia and Montauk Project. You know, this is like Camp Hero is the military base location. And what I just remember is holding his hand and walking through this sliding, it looked like a photo booth. How when you go in, not a photo, like a, if you're like developing film, that's a photo booth, right? No, that's not a photo booth. It's like a sorry, like a dark room, a photography dark room. It looked like something like that, where you're walking through one of these doors that you have to like rotate, and it's just, yeah, completely dark. And I just remember walking through with him, and asking, essentially, I believe that we did a time travel, because I just remember saying, like, what day is it? What time is it? And he's like, we'll get us back to the current time. Like, where we're going, it doesn't matter. And it was like we walked through something. And that's all I really remember about that. It is possible that one of the locations, in fact, that I was in the programming, I really thought, um, like I said, Pittsburgh, and that was sort of off of an intuition of someone else who is a deprogrammer, a friend of mine. Um, I know that we like had driven a long distance, but it is possible that I was programmed there as well, in Montauk a lot. And one other thing that I did see in one of these facilities is what I call a government created alien. And it was like a robot that was made to look like an alien, like a mechanical alien. And they were all over. I don't know how else to say it. It's like a standard, like, gray alien, but it was like wheeling on the floor, like a robot. And I just remember like trying to talk to like it once, and one of the facilitators coming in and yelling at it to leave, and I felt sorry for it. I mean, that's how sensitive I was as well. Like, whether it was a real being or not, I believe it was mechanical. And um I've at least heard one or so other testimonies where someone has mentioned like the government created aliens type of, for whatever purpose that is, I don't know.
Do you remember, I know that it doesn't seem like that it was something that you witnessed and were sort of walking by. It wasn't something you were involved in. Did you see them doing anything, or any uses that you could see the government creating these for and to utilize for?
Just data collection. That is the
Mhm.
only thing that I feel I witnessed, was to keep track of the progress in the sessions to record everything. To like, yeah.
Interesting.
Mhm. That's what I witnessed as the main purpose.
Thank you for sharing that. That might jog somebody's memory, or maybe other people have,
Mhm.
seen something similar.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
Another piece of your puzzle that I want to make sure that we talk about to sort of
Mhm.
create all the different layers that you were
Yeah.
accessed from. So you
Yeah.
had a neighbor and who
Yes.
had a child that was one of your best friends, and
Yes.
it might have been your actual best friend growing up.
Mhm.
You could share about that, but maybe you could talk a little bit about that family as well, because that had a big part as well in your perpetration and sort of where you
Yeah.
were guided to.
Mhm. So, I'm actually just having a sip of water.
Sure, absolutely. Please do.
Because, it jogs a lot and your brain starts to get like, ooh, you're jogging a lot of things loose. Mm. My best friend, who, since I was 2 years old, our parents met in a supermarket where her father came up to my mother and said, "Oh, like, I have a daughter about her age." And that's how they became friends, which of course makes me think that that could have even been a target. Who knows, right? But we became best friends. Like, I even just remember the first time her coming over and playing with me and the babysitter being left with us, and we kept like opening the door. The cat was supposed to stay in a certain room and we kept opening it up. Like, she kept putting a rubber band on the door to keep these French doors closed, and we kept opening it and letting the cat in. Um and her family, she lived on at the highest point in Amagansett. Um and her family lived next door to the Warner. I mean, it was the family of Warner Brothers. If you look at who, created Warner Brothers, it was the heir to the Warner Brothers and that family. And her family would get invited to these sort of like soirees, tent parties, very fancy. They had a large property. And while I was at my friend's house we used to switch off sleepovers, different weekends. And if was at their house, we went to these parties a few times. And, we would dress up. I would wear like a dress and tights and little like Mary Jane shoes and go and play with the other kids that were there, and the adults would be dressed up. And I mean, it was like not just like a tent that is um like a wedding party that has a tent and there's grass inside. This was a tent that was decked out, like internal, inside furniture, fancy curtains, like on the inside, the velvet curtains that could be closed with like these luxurious rope ties, it kind of it started off like a normal party in a sense, with maybe like a weird air around it. And then they would do something like light flickering type of things. And there was a shift in energy, and adults would put on these robes that really, a lot of the robes looked I would say almost identical. I just remember like black, sort of satiny, silky robes. And there would be teenage kids walking on, like, crawling on all fours, serving on like a silver tray, like hors d'oeuvres on their back. And us children would get masks put on our faces, and so that we could not see who was doing what, but we were in the center of the circle. Like, they would have us line up, so we would be on the inner circle, the adults would be on the outer, and it was like we were being passed around in these fetishes type of things. um and I don't even have all of the memories of that. Um, so whether there was a like any kind of penetration, I don't know. But there is one thing that I did remember before that, which was like a testing to see. I won't get too into detail because it's just, but essentially what they do is they can test a child with like an instrument to see, to make sure that a child's not going to show signs of abuse or of penetration. It's like a it's like a gynecological tool. Um and I mean, these people are sophisticated and they understand it, and whether it was filmed or not, because there were celebrities there. I used to go home and tell my mother, like, oh, Soupy Sales was at this party, and um, it's possible I met Jimmy Savile, although he ran in a more, like, UK circle. Like, there was access to a lot of these people, and it is possible it was filmed as blackmail. Um, I don't know all of that, but I know that we were essentially, like, I remember Pin the Tail on the Donkey being played, except it wasn't it wasn't like it was for fetish purposes, like to engage like adults and children interacting and touching. Foot things happening, like, yeah. Um Inappropriate. Absolutely not appropriate. One of their films is used in MK Ultra. It's one of the most famous um, programming tools. Their movie, along with like Alice in Wonderland, which is another very famous programming tool. Their movie's that famous. Some of the that family knows they've had trauma. Um, that part is one of the hardest things for a survivor, is to not be validated, to only be given clues. Um, for example, the I have been validated on certain levels by Ingo Swan's friend, who was my father's friend. I mean, he straight up has admitted to me that he worked with Ingo Swan, and I have that in a what's up conversation, like, spelt out. But he did not admit to like that level of perpetration. So, because these people don't want to be implicated. So, that part for a survivor is one of the most brutal things. If you rely on having your memories corroborated by another human, that part is really hard, you know?
Yeah, especially if they're still active in whatever cult or coven that they're involved in,
Hmm.
and some people don't get memories back very young, if at all, and if they do, it's easy for these cults a lot of times to reprogram them so they sort of forget all over again or just are so scattered that they're not able to piece it together as eloquently as you have, which is really sad, because then this ends up like really breaking up families and friends and causing so much dysfunction on so many levels, whether consciously or not. The
Hmm.
rift of memory and how it can unfold into a dysfunction of its own, remembering what a life was like, and all of a sudden you're losing friends and family and people around you for your awareness. It's very
Hmm.
bizarre and confusing, and it's
Hmm.
ultimately sad. It's like I wish everybody
Yes.
in these systems could come out the other side like you and want to be on the survivor side versus still being victimized, and unfortunately it's so rare that that happens where people regain consciousness and memory integration, and it really is a miracle, and
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy to hear just all these different situations, like living so many lives in one life. You wake up one day, or I should say, one day you go to sleep and you're aware that you lived one life that maybe wasn't perfect, but it also wasn't horrible. You wake up the next day and you realize you were living 10 lives at once, and one
Hmm.
seemed okay, and the other ones were, absolutely
Yes.
horrific. And you were around all these people that you didn't really realize had a part in abuse,
Hmm.
perpetration, and, it's just got to be really a lot to contend with.
It is. And at a certain point, I thought I was going to live in a mental hospital for the rest of my life because I just did not know how I was ever going to put all the fractured pieces back together. And it left me pretty hopeless for a large chunk of time where I was just very much in a dysfunctional, depressed, and passively suicidal, um, you know, mentality. And it definitely was. I mean, I had to do so many things on my healing journey, and I mean, I would say the spiritual part, connecting to Jesus, to Yeshua, to my angelic counsel. Plant medicine helped me. A plant called iboga helped me a lot. I mean, there were multiple things that helped, and just like doing that work on like putting myself back together. And yeah, I wish for others, it's just one of the hardest things to do, but it is possible. And it's even possible when you've been shattered into a million pieces. And because, and I'm going to venture to say that because I wasn't that cooperative, we didn't even like quite get into all of that, but I sort of like failed out of some of that Project Stargate. I mean, they just kept accessing me. And well, if she's not going to do that, we're going to test this on her. Like, they really tried to shatter me. And it didn't work. I mean, it did, but it didn't. And because the spirit is stronger, um, and our connection to a divine plan is stronger if we can all be so lucky to remember ours, and get those original memories
Yeah.
back, not just of the abuse, but of the connection to the ultimate source,
Yes.
you know?
Absolutely. Yes. And your story really does span so much. And I know we kind of covered the groundwork on it.
Yeah.
Um,
And I wanted to say my friend's family also was doing Luciferian practices and
mm,
was possibly even connected because her father used to wear a robe in the house with a um it had an emblem of a wolf, sorry, a sheep unmasking to reveal a wolf in sheep's clothes essentially was their emblem. That is Fabian society, which is directly connected to the UK and communism. And they're a pro pedophilia group. It's connected to Harriet Harman is the woman. So I've had to just, like I said, be my own detective looking up these things and figuring it out. But like if you follow if you have the courage, and the will to follow these leads, you will find it and figure it out. Whether the perpetrators ever admit to anything or not, like you will come to know your own story. Yeah.
Amen to that. And what a miracle it is that you and others have gotten to a place where you can be so integrated through a memory perspective to
Mhm.
understand it, even if you don't know every little thing, just to
Mhm.
have the pieces that you can start putting together. And even if there's a couple missing pieces, to understand what you went through, it can really set you on a path to healing and help, you know, help you regain control over your nervous system and how all those things initially feel whenever you start remembering them, which can be really horrifying.
Mhm. Oh yeah. Yeah. It can be really, really scary. And when I first started to remember, I nearly lost it. And I remember I called this one author, I forget her name, Ellen Lecter, I think it was. She wrote a
Wonderful.
book, right? End Ritual Abuse, right? I called her in 2013 and was like, oh my God, I've been through this. And at that point, no one was really talking about it except for maybe Kathy O'Brien or, there was a couple. And she did not stay on the phone very long with me. So I didn't understand even what I had stumbled upon fully. She said, I can't stay on the phone with you very long. Like, I wanted her to be my therapist immediately because that's the work she used to do. And before she was writing her books, and she said, I don't do this work with one on one survivors anymore. And I said, oh, is it because it's too painful? She said, that's not why. And she's like, I can't stay too long on the phone, but and she said, just know everyone around you likely is involved in some way in this. And she's like, you can do it. Like, you can do this. She kind of just gave me some encouragement, but it's utterly frightening
It is.
at
And you
first.
have an incredible journey of healing. And then on the other side of that, becoming a healer. And I think it would be amazing to do a part two where we go into that part of your story. And,
Yeah.
I'll obviously if there's anything else that you wanted to cover today, we can talk about that. But one thing I really did want to talk about,
Mm.
maybe after we close up, anything else that you wanted to share about those childhood years. You are a healer, and I want to spend a little bit of time sharing what it is that you do and how people can support you and
Mm.
ultimately hire you,
Mhm.
if your services are something that they're seeking right now, because there isn't,
Yeah.
a ton of help out there. So, wanted to sort of pass that over to you if you wanted to talk about that, or if there was some other things that you wanted to tie up with the other conversations that we had, feel free to go into it.
Okay. Yeah, there was one other thing I did want to say
Yeah,
in connection to what we were just speaking of. Oh, I just wanted to encourage like survive survivors who are uncovering their memories and it feels like the never ending like Pandora's box. Um, and you do feel like you're being bombarded, not just with the memories, but possible gang stalking or like where you feel there are real threats still like happening. I think a big key in this is to keep your vibration as high as you possibly can because that and really connect whether you believe in God or not or higher divinity source like connecting to your highest light like it brings you up, it elevates you, and it's like these things can't touch you anymore. And I just wanted to put that out there because I know on top of uncovering things and working on healing, unraveling really, really painful things that you're reliving, um, on top of being bombarded, say, still by perpetrators or that energy or feeling, it's like a double whammy. And so I think like a real key is spiritual nourishment, keeping your vibration really high. There's obviously so many layers to that as well.
I love that
But
spiritual nourishment. That's a really great way to word that.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I wish I knew I had known all of that then because my healing journey was really bumpy in a lot of ways, especially in the beginning.
And now look at you. Now you're speaking on podcasts, you're helping others through their own trauma. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what a turnaround you've made since
Thank you.
remembering and taking action on your healing. It's really amazing to see you on the other side of this now.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I feel much more at peace and I've done a lot of healing and integration. And you had asked what I do. So
Yeah.
what services I have, I mean, I am involved in the arts. I have done a film production and I am a painter and a musician. But my healing work and I love helping other survivors, and I do help other survivors and non-survivors of, SRA and MK Ultra. It can be, life is traumatic.
Yes.
I work with people, and I do inner child deliverance with with Jesus, with Yeshua. So essentially, I connect with him and Jesus is and was an ascended being who graduated and he went through, as we know, like a slew of trauma. But I have been speaking with Jesus since I am a child, and he has manifested as plain as day in front of me and been speaking to me, wanting me to spread his wisdom, which I've agreed to since I'm a child. Um, and he has healed wounds on my skin. Like I cut myself once playing on my finger and he healed it. He is a light worker and ascended master being. And so what I like to do for other people is I like to relay messages when people, come to me with sort of their life situation, looking for certain guidance. I work with him for their guidance. I don't like to necessarily call it channeling because sometimes people affiliate that word. I'm a conduit of him. And my healing also is affiliated with and comes from him. It comes from the Holy Spirit. And that's what I do. So I work with people energetically through him and with messages from him. And and I also, there are it is up to us. We can, God can heal us instantaneously. But because we're on this human path journey, we want to do our own work too. And so the inner child deliverance work, I really like that because the child ego parts that got wounded can be healed with his guidance. And so I do that to heal the wounded parts with people, with clients.
That's so beautiful. Again,
Thank you.
look how cool that is that, you were the one seeking help and now you're able to help other people through their own journey after all the healing that you did. Like what a cool gift to give to
Thank
the
you.
world. And I
Thank
know that
you.
there are a lot of survivors. I get emails pretty frequently from
Mhm.
survivors looking for recommendations for healing, for therapy, for people that can, help deliver them. There's so many things that survivors need in their journey. If somebody
Mhm.
heard what you just said and it resonates with them and they're like, that's exactly what I need, I really want to reach out to her. I want to work directly with a survivor. How can
Yeah.
we get in
Thank
touch with
you.
you?
So I just set up a new like anonymous Instagram,
Yay.
and that is let's see. I'm like, oh
It is.
yes. Okay. So we're Magnolia Dove 777, and they can DM me. And then I did set up an email with that as well. And
Wonderful.
that is Magnolia Dove Trinity at gmail.com. Like my phone number can be provided as well through you if anyone reaches out directly to you. You could you could give my number to like say someone who is looking to, work with like do this kind of work. And I also just want to say I have done multiple deliverances through other deliverance coaches. So I am a clean vessel. I've had exorcisms with interrogation, which is like crazy. I mean, where any part of you that is still like giving to a certain energy or entity is being like really pressed and brought into line in line. um I don't work that harshly. I find that can get a little too cerebral. I really work with Holy Spirit. It's very gentle and loving and pure. Yeah.
Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out and support.
Thank
Um,
you.
One of the easiest things, if you're not seeking her guidance through a healing, one of the easiest things that the rest of you can do is go follow her on social media and just support her content, share it on your stories, connect with it, comment on it. Survivors often get really buried in the mix of the algorithm, and it's sad because other people speak over them who are not survivors and who are not helping survivors or even engaging with them or giving them credit. They're basically taking their information, profiting off of it, pretending that it's their own research, and then these survivors just get sort of tossed to the wind. Their information is being exploited again, their experiences, and society continues to look away from them. So one of the easiest things that we can do as a society to support survivors is if they're on social media to just follow them. It's free, it's easy, and so is sharing their content. So for the rest of you who aren't going to contact her or aren't looking for healing, I'll have her Instagram below and encourage you guys to just go support as an ally, as an advocate, as a support system, help engage with her content, get it seen by more people. And of course, share her links, her email, share her social media with any survivors you might know if you are also working with them, or if you are somebody that connects with them online and follows them. If you see somebody struggling who might need a helping hand, you have another resource now. So please help share her information to anybody who might be in need as well in your life. Those things work absolute wonders to help support survivors. And it's free. It's a really easy thing that we can all collectively do together. And I really appreciate, Magnolia, all the work that you have done. Again, it's just so neat seeing you on the other side of here, and impossible to imagine where you came from, knowing where you are right now. It's like the darkest of the dark to the absolute brightest light. And it's amazing the journey that you've gone on. I feel like you're still just beginning and just getting
Yeah.
started on it, even though you've
Yeah.
been going for so long, but you've
Hmm.
learned so much, and over a decade of healing and trying out different things. What a resource you can be now to people who need guidance and advice through their hardest times. And you've gotten to sort of see a big evolution of this movement where even, 2013, hardly anybody was talking about this stuff besides maybe
Yes.
Kathy O'Brien and a couple other
Yeah.
survivors that you could find if you really dug.
Yes.
Now there's a lot more voices chiming in, and
Yes.
with all this time under your belt that you've gotten to spend trying all these different things and learning and seeing the evolution, it's great having you on the forefront now as a
Thank
public
you.
speaker, getting to share all of this with people and providing your puzzle piece now after you got so many puzzle pieces from other people who helped you along the way. So
Yes.
congratulations on all
Oh,
levels
thank you
for
so much.
you're
I'm working on receiving, like taking that in and like really just taking it in as a truth, you know? It's sometimes hard to be like, wow, I really have done that. So thank you.
you're
Um,
so welcome.
yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for giving me the platform to share this. And yeah,
It's my honor. We all need to
great.
know this stuff and face it, even if it's
We
uncomfortable
do.
to listen to.
Yes.
And it's
Well, it has to stop. I mean, it's this is not this is like a monstrous cycle on the planet that through awareness, like it has to stop. These like these bloodlines have to heal. This is not the way. This is not the way to go, you know?
absolutely, I couldn't agree more, because I think when people initially hear of this, their initial reaction is grab the pitchforks and let's just go kill them all off. And it's so much more complex than that. And because we don't know
Mhm.
about trauma and the different types of ways trauma can affect somebody, from turning them into a psychopath to making them a victim that they need freed from, making them a slave that they do not want to be. There's
Yeah.
different levels of how we need to approach all of this. Ultimately, we want everybody, like how I was saying earlier, to, no matter what they've done, no matter how bad it was,
Mm.
we want everybody to come out and say, all right, I'm going to wipe my hands clean. I'm defecting from this. Enough is enough. I'm breaking the cycle, just like Magnolia did, just like Kathy O'Brien did. I want to be on that side. And then
Yes.
you're going to also have the people who are, they're unchangeable psychopaths. Like they just don't have the capacity to heal, even if we want them to. And so
Yes.
understanding these different levels of the types of victimization that happens, the side effects of it, the fracturing and the damage that it does, and the different levels of damage, what can be healed from, what can't be. It's so important that we understand this, because that's going to be the key to stopping it, is realizing how deeply embedded generationally it is, and that it's not just a swift one and done. We just take everybody out and it stops. This goes back so many generations, and it's still being perpetrated so many generations below us. And
Hmm.
so having that understanding can really help us empathize where it needs empathized, and accept with open arms the people who, if they knew that they could be safe, they'd have arms to walk into that would accept them back into society and want them to heal, just like how, you have done and countless others. And
Yes.
also knowing where to throw the hammer of justice and to say, all right, if you aren't going to take the initiative to want to heal and to come out of this and to stop what you're doing, then we have to figure out the right way to, persecute and, bring justice to those people
Mhm.
who have no intention of stopping. So
Mhm.
hearing all of this really helps us understand the different layers, not just of how these stories and networks work, but the different layers of perpetration, victimization, and the side effects of that, and how we can stop this if we take the time to actually understand trauma, and how it affects society, how it affects the individual, how it affects the family, and how powerful it is that people people take that initiative no matter what the risk is and say enough is enough, just like what you did, and have the courage to walk away from it.
Yes. Yeah. I totally agree. And it's an evolution of consciousness. Like I just see it as, I mean, I can't help but see it as like the cycles and waves of the planet. I'm like, how many more generations is this going to go on before it is like exiled from the planet? Like this is like, I just think the more exposure and less from a victim standpoint of, yeah, like let's go with the pitchforks, like, and more like bringing light and awareness and healing to this for it to make its way off the planet, like, so we can go back to the light and bring heaven on earth, essentially, which is like what I believe is the goal of being here. We're supposed to unify back to the lightest of the light, like our divinity, and bring it here to this fallen world, you know?
Amen to that. And with
Yeah.
leaders like you who lead with love and compassion, but also know boundaries, how to put your foot down and where to execute persecution, and judgment. This really is the way. And it's not just one or the other. Like we have to be in both states of consciousness of understanding this as a whole, and hearing these testimonies, I think, are the way that that happens. And
Yeah.
so again, I commend you. You're brilliant, you're incredible, you're eloquent. I would have never
Oh,
guessed that this
thank
is like your first time coming on a platform like this
Oh,
and talking about it because you're so versed and like you're amazing public speaker.
oh my
Um,
goodness, thank you. At first, I felt like there was a big blank, and I was nervous at first, but thank you for saying that.
You
It
did
gets,
wonderful, and I'm really excited to have you back on and to dig into more parts of your story because we
yeah,
covered
me
so
too.
much today. This was like a jam-packed episode, but
Yes,
you have
yes,
so
me
many
too.
more layers to your story,
I
including
do,
your
but I
beautiful
feel
gym.
we covered really like all the groups, like a lot of groundwork, actually.
100%. And
Yeah.
next time we can always go over and sort of polish it off anything that we didn't include this time and move into different aspects of your story on part two. So I'm really excited to have you back on and really appreciate you, Magnolia, coming on today and sharing with us and giving us your puzzle piece.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you, really.
You're welcome. It's an honor. It's the least we can do is listen to all of this after you had to endure and survive it. So it's my great honor to be able to do this. And I know other people on the other side of the screen feel the same way. And
Yeah.
so for everybody listening on the other side of the screen, I will have Magnolia's email below, as well as her Instagram. Go support her if you're a survivor or not. And then, of course, if you are a survivor of any kind or somebody dealing with trauma or PTSD, or just needing to sort of move forward in your healing if you're stuck, you have a resource. So please reach out to her and see if it's a good fit on both ends and if what you're going through is something she can help you with. But please share her information as well with other wounded warriors who might be privy to, wanting somebody that can help them walk through their healing journey. And so I'll have all that below, and I really encourage you guys to help share and elevate her and to share this episode with people that you think would find value and education and ultimately just people curious about learning the ins and outs of the world like we're curious about it. And I'll have all my information below as well. Follow me wherever you guys can. We couldn't do this without you, you guys. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.